Yes, I think that's an important question because if we look at how much more work we have to do, we have a great deal of work to do, especially in the arena of intangible heritage. There are a number of Ismaili Jamaats whose cultures were historically oral. So they didn't have necessarily a context where they had a written tradition available. There are contexts where even the languages remain oral and they continue to be oral. So we are talking, if again to go back to the example we were talking about earlier, Gilgit-Baltistan, there are half a dozen languages spoken there, which are the languages that Ismailis have spoken, talked about who they are, what they are for centuries, and yet they remain oral. So we are racing against time because we have a lot to document, a lot to preserve, and at times time is not on our side because we lose members of our Jamaat because of various factors. Some are political, sometimes even migration. There's a lot of migration happen, and once you lose touch with your roots, you move to a different part. Obviously, you lose the context, you lose the language slowly, especially with the subsequent generations of people. So one critical challenge that we are facing is that how do we ensure that in a timely fashion, we work in preserving all those voices in a way that they can help us better understand the histories of the Jamaats living in those parts of the world. The way we try and overcome that challenge is to work with our partners. Of course, as an institution, we have limitations. We have certain resources available, but we are also lucky and fortunate that we have our sister institutions and our large pool of alumni students available. And they offer their time either as consultants in a voluntary capacity or being part of another institution. So we are working in that direction. The other area where we have a challenge is, we live in a time where a lot of our Jamaati members live in conflict zones, where it's not easy to go and work in the way that it may be possible in other contexts. Sometimes, what we are talking about, information, it's just something as basic as information available. Who are the scholarly families living in a particular part of a world? What kinds of materials they have inherited? What kind of care? In what condition it is lying there? Even that kind of information is not available because of those political situations or various other factors. Again, we are fortunate that we have institutions available in that part and sometimes our members of the Jamaat. So it helps us, but obviously, working in a context where we were a bit more free in terms of going and visiting and then working with people and then, sharing learning and best practices as it is possible in other contexts is not possible there. Leaving those aside, we are mindful of those challenges and hoping that as we move forward with heritage being a priority, not just at the Institute, but across other institutions, especially our partner institutions, we are hopeful that we'll be able to navigate that challenge as well.
So I think in terms of identifying and documenting sites, we face some of the same challenges that Wafi has already noted. Part of it is just a question of sources. We don't know this material. So to date now, we have identified over 1,700 sites in 61 countries around the world, of which we have documented over 1,300 in 43 countries around the world. That's huge. And to the extent that it's been possible, we have run out of primary sources in the English language for us to be able, because everything we document, has to be referenced back to something, right? And where it isn't, and that has increasingly been the case, we now need to go back to the field and to explore these contexts and these sites. So we are trying to do that. We were trying to do that when the pandemic hit, and of course we are still sort of recovering from that. So a lot of our research has been desk-based or pre-pandemic fieldwork. So people who have worked with us have done particular kinds of work, their PhDs or fieldwork in these places, and they have generously shared their findings and their knowledge and their resources with us. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And so increasingly now, since we've exhausted looking at all the published primary sources in English, we're now looking at other sources. So I have amazing colleagues in the team who are looking at, who have capacity in Arabic, in Persian, in Urdu or in Hindi, in Russian, in Tajik, in Turkish. Now, some of these we do better than others because we have more capacity than others. But these are fields we are looking into. There's an enormous amount of material in Turkish that none of us speak. So we're sort of muddling our way through Google translations and things. But they are robust enough, and so we are collating them with a view that at some point in time we will be able to look at them in more detail than we can currently look at, and possibly even translate them so they are available to a wider audience, both academic and general. The second challenge, I think, is in terms of the point you made around preservation. In many contexts where we have identified sites that need looking into, that are at serious risk of loss, there are difficulties in accessing these sites for a number of different reasons. And so, we look at those sites with some degree of concern. And again, part of our agenda for the next couple of years is really to try and understand how we can contribute in the ways that are most helpful for the communities concerned. And I think finally, the third challenge is one that is more internal and sort of community oriented. We need to know more about who we are and what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And I think in that sense, we have a challenge and a responsibility to learn as much as we can, to find out as much as we can about these places. And I think sometimes, at least in the present time, we tend to, because a building is with us, a site is with us, we take it for granted. And so we think, well, it's always here. I mean, we don't really think through who else is going to be using it down the line. And so we have examples, of buildings that we have created, that still belong to us, that we still use, but where, a dilapidated plaque, for example, is not being replaced, or because the purpose for that building has been converted into something else. And so the original plaque that commemorated, who opened it up, who inaugurated or founded the stone for it or whatever, we haven't taken the time to replace that with a fresh one. We've just left it. Because we know it belongs to us, but 50 years down the line, things might change, right? And so if we don't replace those things, then that, again, it begins to erode, as I said earlier, these patterns of our presence and of our impact and of our contributions, not just to ourselves and the communities that we have created and live in, but the wider communities of which we are always going to be a part of. And I think that's an internal challenge we need to be much more mindful of, particularly where present-day sites are concerned, that may not be iconic and representative in the way that this lovely building is, but that are nonetheless important for us to be able to think through.